The wind moved slowly over the wide stretch of dry land, carrying the dust of an old trail and the scent of a long, hot day. The sun hung low above the mesas as if it had been watching everything that happened in that harsh corner of the frontier. A lone rider approached the abandoned edge of the settlement, where no one ever stayed long. Anyone watching from afar would have seen the tall Apache warrior guiding his horse with steady hands. His long black hair tied with simple tribal bands, his chest bare and marked with light tattoos that carried stories older than the land itself. People spoke of him as someone who never came down from the high ridges unless there was a reason. That day, he had won. Ahead of him sat a woman on the dry ground beside a broken fence. Her clothes were covered in dust, her expression tired. Her arms wrapped around a newborn girl, as if the small life in her arms was the only thing she had left. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon because she had nothing else to hold on to. The settlement behind her had already shut its doors, pretending she no longer existed. The moment the baby cried for the first time, the people who claimed to be her family turned their backs. They wanted a son to carry a name forward. They believed a daughter was a burden. Their fear of shortages, of hunger, of future hardship had twisted into bitterness until they blamed the child who had done nothing except breathe. When she heard the distant hooves, she did not rise. She waited, thinking it might be someone who had come to push her farther away. She whispered to the baby, telling her not to fear, though her own voice shivered with uncertainty. She had nowhere to go, no food, no shelter, and no idea how to survive on land that showed no mercy. The rider stopped a few steps away. The warrior looked at her with a calm expression that did not reveal what he was thinking. He studied the way she held the infant, the way her eyes tried to stay strong even though her hands trembled. His horse exhaled softly, almost as if it could sense the quiet desperation surrounding her. She felt the warrior's gaze and lifted her chin, ready for whatever harsh words or orders might come. Instead, he simply sat still for a moment, watching her with a patience she had not seen from anyone in years. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. All she managed was a thin whisper, asking if he needed something. He leaned slightly forward, his voice steady and low. He told her that he had seen the settlement from afar and noticed people leaving in a hurry. He said he rode closer only to understand what had happened. She did not want to explain, yet she had no choice. The truth fell out of her in short breaths. The people cast her out because the child was a girl and they did not want to carry the weight of another mouth to feed. The warrior listened without interrupting. He stared toward the settlement, as if measuring the size of its cruelty. He asked her what she planned to do now. It was the question she feared most. She looked down at her daughter, tracing the tiny fingers that curled around her own. She said she had no plan. She said she only wanted the baby to live, even if she herself did not. That single sentence tightened something in the warrior's expression. It was the first time emotion showed in his eyes, though it remained quiet and controlled. He dismounted from his horse with slow movements so that he would not startle her or the child. He walked closer until the shadow of his tall frame fell across her. She felt small, but not threatened. Something about the way he stood gave the moment a strange calmness. He did not repeat the question. Instead, he spoke in a tone that carried strength without harshness. He told her that no child deserved to be thrown away. He said his own people valued daughters because they were life. He told her that her child cried with the voice of hope, not burden. His words surprised her so deeply that she could not respond. No one had spoken to her like that before. She searched his face, trying to understand his purpose. The warrior was known in the far plains for making decisions without hesitation. People said he trusted the land more than he trusted people. Yet here he was, offering comfort to a stranger who had no place left to stand. Her fear mixed with confusion as she waited for him to step back onto his horse and leave. Her behind like the rest of them. He did the opposite. He crouched near her and asked to see the baby. She hesitated, then slowly turned the child so he could look. The warrior studied the small face, the soft, quiet breaths, the fragile innocence that had caused so much cruelty. He looked at the woman again, and something unspoken passed between them. Something shaped by loss, resilience, and the harsh truth of frontier life. He rose to his full height, tightened the straps on his horse, then turned to her with a clear decision, written in his voice. He said she and the child could not stay here. She needed safety, food, and protection from the cold night coming fast. Before she had time to question him, he stepped closer, his presence lowering the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. He spoke with calm authority, the kind that left no space for argument. "You are coming with me." The words hit her with force. She pulled the baby close, unsure if she should feel fear or hope. No one had ever said they wanted her to go anywhere except away. She asked him why he would take her, why he would carry a burden that others had thrown aside. His response was simple. He said she was not a burden. He said the child was not a burden. He said the people who cast her out had lost their sense of what mattered, and he would not ride past someone who had been wronged. The world around them grew quiet. Only the desert wind moved. The woman stared at him, wondering if she could trust a stranger, especially a man known across the frontier for his strength and silence. Yet something in his eyes held no cruelty. She felt the first spark of safety she had known in a long time. Still, a part of her hesitated. If she agreed, she would step into a future she knew nothing about. If she refused, the night would swallow her and her newborn without mercy. The warrior waited. He did not push or threaten. He simply stood there, offering a choice she had never expected. She opened her mouth to speak. But before the words formed, the sound of distant yelling rolled across the open land. Several riders appeared on the ridge, moving fast, shouting her name with an angry tone that made the warrior shift his stance in an instant. She recognized the voices. They were the same men who had cast her out. They were the same ones who had slammed the door behind her. Now they were returning with a reason she did not understand. The warrior stepped in front of her, shielding her and the child with his broad frame. He reached for the rope tied at his waist, ready for whatever was coming. He told her to stay behind him. She held her baby tight as the riders approached. Dust rising behind them, fear climbed inside her chest while the warrior stood firm, unmoving, waiting for the confrontation. The approaching men slowed their horses and glared at her with cold anger. Their leader shouted that the child belonged to the settlement and they had changed their minds. They claimed they wanted the baby back. The warrior lifted his chin. His voice dropped to a quiet warning. He asked them why they wanted what they had thrown away. The men did not answer. The air thickened between them as the sun dipped lower, turning the land into long shadows. The woman felt her heart pounding. The warriors of the ridge stared back with growing tension. The Apache warrior did not move. The riders tightened their grip on their reins. The baby whimpered, and the desert held its breath. Waiting for what would happen next, the riders held back for a moment as if they were deciding how far they could push their luck. The woman felt the wind shift behind her, and the Apache warrior's presence stayed steady in front of her. Like a wall, the desert itself had raised for her sake. The men from the settlement exchanged glances before their leader pushed his horse a step forward. His jaw was tense, and his eyes darted between the warrior and the baby in her arms. She tightened her grip, trying to steady the small breaths of the child who sensed something wrong. The warrior did not flinch. He simply watched them, the same way a mountain watches a passing storm. The leader claimed again that they had come for the child. The woman knew the truth behind their anger. They were not here out of guilt or love. They were driven by fear that the blame for casting her out would travel to the next town or to the traders who often visited. They worried someone would question their morals. They worried someone would discover the real reason they pushed her away. The leader had always needed the world to see him as a righteous man, even when his actions proved otherwise. She stood still, keeping the baby close. Her pulse quickened as she waited for the warrior to respond. Instead of shouting or drawing a weapon, he asked the men why they wanted a child they had abandoned. The leader opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, as if unsure how to shape a lie that sounded like truth. The other men shifted uneasily. The rider on the far left mumbled something about the child bringing luck in the future. The warrior raised a brow as if he found the excuse hollow. He stepped just slightly to angle his body in front of hers, making it clear she was under his protection. When the men realized they were losing ground, the leader tried a different tone. He said the Apache had no right to interfere in matters of the settlement. The warrior looked at him in silence for a long stretch until the leader's voice cracked. The frontier knew this warrior by reputation. He was not someone who acted without reason. When he made a decision, it was final. He did not speak again. He simply held his ground. Finally, the leader signaled the others to pull back for now. He glared at the woman with a look that was both warning and resentment. He told her the matter was not finished and that they would return soon. She felt her stomach twist with fear at his words. The men turned their horses and rode off, leaving dust floating between the silent groups. The moment they disappeared beyond the ridge, the wind picked up again. The world seemed to release a breath it had been holding. The warrior turned to her. His voice softened just enough to show he was not speaking as a threat, but as someone who understood the danger. He told her they could not stay out in the open any longer. She nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. He reached for the rope on his horse and guided it closer. He offered his hand to help her onto the saddle. She hesitated, unsure if she would be a burden, but the warrior gave a small, reassuring nod. She climbed up with the baby in her arms, settling carefully against the worn leather. He mounted behind her with steady ease, and the horse adjusted under their combined weight. They rode away from the settlement, leaving behind the broken fence, the silence, and the memory of betrayal. The land stretched far and wide, a mix of red dust and dry brush. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with warm colors. She felt the warrior's presence behind her, solid and calm. She kept glancing back at her child to ensure she was safe, though the infant had drifted into a gentle sleep. The warrior guided the horse through winding paths only someone raised in the hills would know as they traveled deeper into the wilderness. She began to wonder who he really was beyond the stories whispered in the frontier towns. People said he was a man who walked between two worlds, respected by his own people and feared by others who misunderstood him. They said he followed the old ways and that he listened to the land before making any choice. She had never spoken to someone like him before. She wanted to ask how he happened to ride past that morning. She wanted to ask why he had chosen to help her when he could have just kept going. Before she could speak, he told her the settlement's actions were not new to him. He had seen many families cast out daughters in fear of scarce winters or failing crops. He said the land was harsh enough without people adding cruelty to it. He had learned to watch from afar and step in only when he felt it was the right thing. She noticed that when he spoke about children, his voice carried a quiet sadness. It hinted at something he did not say, but kept buried deep. Something connected to loss. They reached a narrow valley, bordered by tall rock formations. At the base of one stood a small camp hidden by scattered brush. There was a shelter made of wooden poles, covered with layered hides. A fire pit sat in the center with ashes still warm. The place felt remote, untouched by the bitterness of the settlements. The warrior stopped the horse and helped her down. She thanked him, though gratitude felt too small for what he had done. He showed her a place to sit near the shelter. He gathered a blanket from inside and placed it gently around her shoulders. She held her baby close as the night began to cool. The warrior lit a small fire with practiced hands. Flames grew slowly, casting a warm glow over the valley. He placed a pot of water above the fire and added herbs with a scent that reminded her of pine. She watched him from the corner of her eye. His movements were calm and thoughtful, as if each action held meaning. She sensed he was someone who carried responsibility like a silent vow. He finally sat near the fire. The crackling light reflected off the small tribal jewelry he wore around his neck. For a long while, neither of them spoke. She hoped the quiet would ease her mind, but instead it deepened her questions. She asked him how he knew she needed help. He replied that he had been scouting the area since dawn. He had noticed tension in the settlement days before. Something about the people there felt restless and unpredictable. The moment he saw smoke rising that morning, he rode closer. He did not expect to find her alone, abandoned with a newborn. She swallowed hard, remembering the moment the door shut behind her. The warrior listened without judgment. He said the frontier was full of stories like hers, each one shaped by fear and desperation. She wondered aloud if her daughter was cursed in their eyes. The warrior told her no child was cursed. It was people who twisted fear into superstition. The fire grew warmer, the valley quieter. Yet she felt the threat lingering in the distance. The men would return. She asked the warrior what would happen if they found her again. His expression hardened just slightly. He said he would handle them, but they would not give up easily. The settlement leader had pride in his bones and trouble in his words. The men would not want news spreading that they cast out a mother and child. They would try to force the story into something else. She sensed the warrior was calculating possibilities, mapping dangers in his mind. She looked around the valley. It felt safe for the moment, but she knew safety was a fragile thing in the frontier. She felt her daughter stir, pulling at her clothes. She soothed the infant softly. The warrior watched, his gaze thoughtful. He told her she had strength even if she did not see it in herself. He said surviving what she had endured was not something weak people could do. She thanked him again, but he shook his head. He said helping her was the right thing, not something that needed repayment. Still, she felt guilty for bringing danger toward him. She asked if his people would be angry he brought her. He considered the question before answering. His people respected life. They would judge actions by truth, not by rumor. But he also said they might ask questions. They might wonder why he intervened. She realized that even he was taking a risk by standing with her. The fire dimmed slightly as the night deepened. Coyotes called in the distance. The woman pulled the blanket tighter. She asked the warrior what they would do next. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He said they would have to move again soon. The settlement men might track them by morning. The valley was only a temporary shelter. She nodded, feeling fear tighten in her chest. Before she could ask anything more, the warrior looked sharply toward the ridge above the valley. His posture changed. He rose to his feet. The night wind carried a faint sound, hooves, not many, but close enough to stir alarm. The warrior stepped forward, his hand reaching for the long staff propped near the doorway of the shelter. The firelight flickered against his tense stance. He told her to stay close to the shelter and keep the baby quiet. Her heart hammered again. She held her child tight as the sound of hooves drew nearer. Shadows moved on the ridge. The warrior waited, ready for whoever approached. The first voice that called out was not one she expected. It was someone who knew the warrior, someone who should not have found them so soon. The voice rolled down from the ridge. Carried by the cold air of the frontier night, it spoke the warrior's name in the Apache tongue, sharp and clear. The woman felt the warrior go still beside the fire. He answered in the same language, his tone low but firm. She could not catch the meaning, only the weight in his words. Hooves slid on loose rock as riders guided their horses down the narrow path into the valley. Soon, she could see them by the firelight. Several Apache men wrapped in dark blankets, feathers and beads catching small flashes of light. The one in front sat straight and proud. His features were older than the warrior's, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes deep and careful. He studied the scene in silence, taking in the woman, the child, the small camp. His gaze settled on the warrior with a look that held both worry and reprimand. The warrior stood tall, staff in hand, as if ready to defend his choices. The woman could feel a bond between them, something closer than friendship, something shaped by many shared winters. The older man spoke again in their tongue. The warrior replied, and the exchange grew more heated, though the volume never rose. The woman's heart pounded as she watched them. She knew they were talking about her and the baby. She saw the older man point toward the distant hills where the settlement lay hidden behind darkness. She saw the warrior shake his head. The other riders glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. One of them, younger and more restless, slid from his horse and inspected the tracks around the camp, as if measuring how long they had been there and who else might have passed. Finally, the older man turned toward her and switched to the trade language that many in the old American frontier used with one another. He introduced himself as the warrior's uncle. His voice held authority, but it was not cruel. He explained that word of trouble near the settlement had reached their people, and when the warrior did not return as expected, they followed his trail. He said they knew the settlement leader by reputation, a man who liked to play the judge over those weaker than himself. He looked at the baby in her arms and sighed, as if he had seen this pattern before. The woman tried to explain in simple words what had happened. She told him how the settlement cast her out after she gave birth to a girl, how they changed their minds only when the Apache warrior offered help, how they threatened to come again. The uncle listened without interrupting. The other riders shifted quietly. One of them muttered that the settlers were fools to throw away a child, then try to claim her as if she were a piece of cattle. The warrior's jaw tightened. The uncle then turned back to his nephew and spoke in their own language. Though she did not understand, the woman could guess the meaning. He was asking why the warrior had taken responsibility for a stranger when the tribe already faced pressures from the army, from settlers, from the shrinking land where their horses could still run free. Bringing an abandoned woman and her newborn into their territory could invite new trouble. The warrior answered with a steady voice. Even without knowing the words, she heard the conviction in them. He gestured toward her and the child as if they were the only answer he needed. The tension between uncle and nephew thickened, but beneath it she sensed a deep respect. The older man finally nodded, not in agreement but in recognition that the decision had already been made. Yet he warned them that danger was closing in. Riders from the settlement had been seen near the river, angry and impatient. Some carried rifles. If they followed the warrior's tracks, they could reach this valley by dawn. The woman felt cold slide through her bones at the thought. The uncle suggested they return to the main Apache camp before first light. Their elders would decide what to do about the woman and the child, and how to handle any move from the settlement. The warrior glanced at her for a long moment, as if asking a question without words. She held his gaze and understood he was silently offering her a choice again. Go with them into a world she did not know or walk away into uncertainty. She looked down at her daughter's small face and knew there was no real choice. The wild land might be harsh, but it felt more honest than the false welcome of the settlement that had thrown her out. She said she would go where he led. The uncle studied her, then gave a short nod. He told her that among their people, a child was not blamed for the fear of adults. He also warned that life in their camp would not be easy. There would be rules, questions, tests of loyalty. She said hardship did not frighten her. Betrayal did. The uncle ordered his men to keep watch on the ridge through the night. 2 riders led their horses to higher ground, scanning the darkness for any sign of strangers. Down in the valley, the warrior added more wood to the fire. Sparks drifted upward like silent prayers into the cold sky. The woman laid the baby on a folded blanket near the warmth and tried to rest, but sleep would not come. Her thoughts kept returning to the settlement leader's voice and the promise that he would return. While the camp settled into guarded quiet, the warrior sat a short distance away, sharpening the edge of his spear with slow, practiced strokes. The sound was soft but steady, keeping time with the beating of her heart. After a while she moved closer and asked him about the uncle and the others. It felt important to understand the people whose fate she was now tied to. The warrior explained that his uncle was one of the respected voices among their band, a man who had seen many changes in the West. He said their people had been pushed from valley to valley as more settlers and soldiers arrived, each claiming the land as if it had never belonged to anyone before. He told her that some of his own people wanted to fight back at every turn, while others believed survival meant learning to bend without breaking. The warrior himself walked a line between both paths. He believed in defending what mattered, but not throwing lives away in hopeless anger. When he saw the settlement treat her and the baby as disposable, he recognized the same cold thinking he had seen from others who wanted the land without the people on it. In return, she spoke of her own past. She had come to the frontier with a wagon train years ago, seeking a fresh start after losing her first family to illness in the East. The settlement promised a new life, a place where hard work would earn respect. At first it seemed true. She helped with washing, sewing, and tending small crops. When she became pregnant, the leader promised she would not lack shelter. That promise faded as drought and hunger crept in. Rumors began that the settlement could not support more children. When the child arrived and turned out to be a girl, the leader used it as an excuse, saying the settlement needed strong sons for defense and labor. His words were cold, his eyes fixed on his own worries rather than her pain. Telling the story made her chest ache. Yet it also sharpened her strength. She saw the way the warrior watched her as she spoke, not with pity, but with deep attention. He said her courage in holding the child even when everyone turned away showed the kind of heart that could endure the old American frontier. She felt both humbled and strengthened by his words. Their quiet exchange was interrupted when one of the riders on the ridge whistled a warning. The sound cut through the valley like an arrow. The warrior sprang to his feet, and the uncle rose with surprising speed for someone of his years. The woman clutched her baby and moved toward the shelter. The whistling came again, this time sharper. The rider slid down the slope, breath fast, eyes wide. He said he saw flickers of lanterns far off near the low hills leading to the valley. The settlement men were on the move. The uncle narrowed his eyes, thinking quickly. He ordered the fire stamped low so it would not give away their position. Ash and embers scattered, leaving only a dim glow. The night seemed to grow colder as the light faded. He said the settlers might not know the exact path into the valley, but if they followed tracks long enough, they would find some trace of the camp. The warrior suggested leaving now and moving along the canyon floor where the rock would hide their trail. The uncle agreed, yet warned that traveling with a newborn in the dark mountain paths would be hard. The woman heard all of this and felt an old fear rise again. Once more, she was at the center of trouble. She asked if they should hand her over to the settlers in order to protect the tribe from conflict. The warrior turned on her with a look that held hurt and anger. He said she must never offer herself as a trade for safety. He said if they allowed fear to decide, they would become just like those who cast her out. His words cut through her doubt. Still, she understood the danger her presence brought. The uncle placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder to calm him, then told her that their people did not hand over the helpless to those who meant harm. However, he added that they must be wise. The army already watched their band with suspicion. Any clash with settlers could bring soldiers in numbers they could not match. Every choice carried risk. Every move would echo through the canyons and towns. In that moment, the main conflict took clearer shape around them. It was no longer just about a woman thrown away for giving birth to a girl. It was about whose values would shape the land. The settlement wanted control, clear order, numbers that matched their fears. The Apache camp wanted to hold on to respect for life and balance with the earth, even as those values were pushed against from all sides. The woman and her child now sat at the line. Where those two worlds met, the uncle decided they would ride toward the main camp under the cover of darkness. Moving slowly and carefully, he sent 2 riders ahead as scouts. Another would circle back and erase as many tracks as possible. The warrior saddled his horse and helped the woman mount, settling her in front of him so he could guard her and the baby. The valley that had seemed quiet a few hours before now felt like a trap closing in. As they left the camp, the moon slipped behind thin clouds, turning the path into a maze of shapes and shadows. The only sounds were the soft clink of bits, the creak of worn leather, the low murmur of Apache voices giving quiet directions. The woman held her daughter and tried to steady her breathing. Behind them somewhere, men from the settlement searched with lanterns and raised voices, driven by pride, fear, and a desire to rewrite the story they had created. The riders made their way into the narrow canyon, where high walls of stone rose on each side. The warrior kept one hand on the reins and the other hovering near his spear. The air smelled of dust and distant pine trees. Danger pressed in around them like another presence riding close. Each turn in the canyon could reveal safety or new threats. They moved deeper into the darkness, into the heart of the conflict that was only beginning to unfold. With no clear path out yet in sight, the canyon walls narrowed as the group pressed forward, their horses stepping carefully over loose stone. The woman felt the warrior's steady grip behind her as he guided the horse through the twisting path. The air grew colder with every step. Only faint starlight filtered down between the tall rocks. She clutched her daughter close, listening to the soft beat of the child's heartbeat against her chest. It helped steady her fear, though the worry inside her kept rising with every sound carried by the wind. Somewhere behind them, the settlement men were pushing across the land, driven by old pride and new anger. Their lanterns would be searching the hills, their voices growing louder as they realized how close they were. The Apache uncle rode near the front, signaling in low whispers to the scouts ahead. Their silhouettes melted into the shadows with practiced ease. The woman admired their calm, even though her nerves felt raw. The warrior leaned slightly forward and spoke near her ear, reassuring her that they were protected as long as they moved with caution. She nodded. She could not shake the feeling that their enemy was closer than they wanted to believe. A distant sound echoed through the canyon. It was faint at first, like the soft tap of rock against rock. Then it grew sharper. One of the scouts lifted a hand, halting the entire group. Everyone froze. The horses shifted uneasily, ears flicking toward the sound. The uncle narrowed his eyes and whispered something the woman could not understand. The warrior responded in their tongue, tension slipping into his voice. The echo grew again, bouncing between the canyon walls until it became clear. It was metal striking stone. Someone carrying rifles was making their way through the rocks. The woman's breath caught in her throat. The warrior placed a hand on her arm to steady her. The uncle motioned for the group to turn off the main path into a side crevice barely visible in the dark. The Apache riders guided their horses carefully, avoiding noise. The woman held her child so close she could feel the tiny breaths warm against her skin. The crevice opened into a narrow dead end tucked deep in the canyon wall. The riders gathered tightly, pressing themselves against the rock to stay hidden. The warrior dismounted silently, then helped her slide down. He guided her to stand behind a large boulder that blocked most of the path. The baby stirred, but he gently touched the blanket. Calming the infant with a softness that surprised her, voices grew louder from the main canyon. Men were calling to one another, their lanterns bobbing as they searched for tracks. The settlement leader's tone cut through the night, sharp and irritated. He shouted that the Apache must have taken the woman by force, twisting the truth to suit his rage. His words echoed off the rock, spinning the story into something it had never been. The woman felt anger push against her fear. She wanted to shout back that he was lying, but the warrior's firm hand on her shoulder reminded her to stay silent. Any sound could give away their hiding place. Lantern light flickered along the canyon floor. Shadows stretched across the rock as the settlers passed by, searching every turn. The uncle whispered orders to the young scout beside him. The scout slipped away, moving like part of the darkness. The warrior kept his gaze fixed on the narrow gap of the crevice, watching every shift of light. The woman held the baby close and prayed the child would not cry out. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if the settlers could hear it. The footsteps slowed. Lanterns hovered near the crevice entrance. One of the settlers muttered that tracks disappeared near this point. The leader demanded they search the area. Horses stomped. Metal scraped. A lantern swung closer, its glow creeping along the canyon wall. She held her breath as light slid nearer. The warrior tightened his grip on his spear. The uncle readied his bow. The Apache riders held their breath, knowing the smallest mistake would turn the hiding place into a trap. Then a sudden shout came from farther down the canyon. The settlers whipped their heads toward the sound. One man yelled that he saw movement by the river bend. The leader cursed and ordered them to follow the noise. The lantern light pulled away from the crevice as they charged toward the false trail. The shout had been created by the scout who slipped away moments earlier. He mimicked the cry of wild animals mixed with human footsteps. A trick meant to draw attention. It worked perfectly. The settlers thundered down the canyon, leaving only dust floating in their wake. The group remained still until the sound faded. The uncle exhaled slowly and signaled that they should move again. They led the horses out of the crevice and followed the narrow path deeper into the canyon. The warrior lifted the woman back onto the horse, then mounted behind her. She felt her heart returning to its rhythm as they moved away from the danger. She whispered thanks to him, though her voice shook with the aftershock of fear. He told her they were not safe yet, but they had gained a little time. The canyon twisted again, opening into a wider path that led toward distant ridges with tall pines. Ahead lay the direction of the main Apache camp. But the journey was far from over, as the stars shifted above them, the sky hinting at the faint light of dawn. The woman noticed the warrior growing more tense. His shoulders stiffened, his gaze scanning every shadow along the path. She asked him what troubled him. He answered quietly that the settlers were no longer the only concern. He feared that other groups might be tracking them too. The army had been moving through the frontier more often lately, pushing deeper into Apache land. If soldiers found them traveling with a woman and child, misunderstandings could turn deadly. The uncle confirmed this with a grim nod. He said the army scouts had already marked the valleys near their territory. If they crossed paths with soldiers, their situation could become far more complicated. The woman's fear rose again. Trouble seemed to come from every direction. She asked if this journey was safe for the baby. The warrior told her that danger lived everywhere in the frontier, but staying with him gave her the best chance. His words were not meant to comfort lightly. They were a truth shaped by the world. He understood better than anyone. The group traveled on until the canyon finally opened into a wide basin surrounded by tall cliffs. Morning light brushed the edge of the rocks, turning shadows gold. The uncle signaled a stop. They needed water, rest, and a chance to decide their next move. The woman slid off the horse with the warrior's help. Her legs trembled, but she steadied herself. She found a smooth rock to sit on and nursed her baby, while the Apache riders searched the area. The warrior knelt near a stream, filling a small bowl with water and heating it with warmed stones, making a mild drink for the child. The sight of him helping so gently stirred something inside her, something she had not felt in a long while: trust. She watched the uncle pacing slowly, studying the basin with a furrowed brow. After the baby drifted into a soft sleep, she joined him. She asked if the camp was still far. He said they could reach it before nightfall if they traveled fast. But he also said speed could reveal their path to enemies. They needed to move carefully, testing the ground ahead. He spoke of his people's worries. The camp held families, children, elders. Bringing conflict near it was dangerous. She felt guilt twist inside her again. But the uncle assured her that the warrior had made his decision for reasons deeper than obligation. He said his nephew saw things in people that others often overlooked as they spoke. The warrior and the scouts returned, faces tense. They found fresh tracks along the outer edge of the basin. The footprints were too heavy to belong to Apache men. They belonged to settlers or soldiers. The group had not yet entered the basin, but they were close. The woman felt a chill run through her spine. She looked at her child sleeping peacefully in her arms and knew she had to stay strong. She could not break now. The uncle gathered everyone near the horses. He said they must reach the hidden path into the high pines before the trackers arrived. The path was steep and dangerous, but it would lead them closer to the safety of the Apache camp. If the settlers or soldiers reached the basin before they escaped, the narrow climb could trap them. The warrior moved to her side and whispered that she would ride with him again. She nodded without hesitation. Her trust in him felt unshakable now. They began to climb up the rocky slope. The incline forced the horses to take slow, careful steps. Loose gravel tumbled down behind them with every movement. The woman clung to the warrior as the path narrowed into a ledge barely wide enough for the horse. Below them, the drop stretched into shadows. The warrior guided them with calm precision, knowing one mistake could send them falling. Behind them, voices erupted in the basin. The settlers had arrived. Their shouts rose in anger when they spotted tracks leading up the slope. She felt her heart leap into her throat. The uncle urged the group to move faster, his horse pushing forward despite the narrow ledge. The warrior looked over his shoulder and saw lanterns beginning to climb the basin wall. The chase was on. The settlers spread out, some climbing the rocks on foot, others guiding horses where the slope allowed. The woman could hear their threats echoing through the canyon. They shouted accusations demanding she be returned. They twisted her story even further. They claimed she had been taken against her will. The warrior's jaw tightened at their lies. The climb grew steeper. One horse stumbled, causing loose stone to fall. A shout came from below as settlers spotted the movement. They were climbing faster now, driven by fury. The woman held her baby tight, trembling as the ledge narrowed again. The warrior steadied her with one arm and guided the horse toward a narrow turn where the path bent between two large stone pillars. If they reached the ridge above, they could disappear into the forest. But they needed time, and time was running out. The uncle signaled that once they reached the top, They must split into two groups. One group would create a false path to draw the settlers away. The woman felt panic rise. She did not want to be separated from the warrior. The uncle saw her fear and said she would stay with his nephew. The warrior nodded, his eyes steady on hers, showing he would not leave her. A sharp crack echoed from below. A settler fired a rifle into the air, trying to intimidate them. The sound reverberated through the canyon, shaking her nerves. Another shot fired, hitting the rock wall near one of the riders. Stone chips scattered like sparks. The Apache riders urged their horses forward. The warrior shielded her with his arm as the group pushed toward the ridge. The settlers climbed faster. Their lanterns bobbed like angry fireflies in the darkness. The woman looked down and saw the leader among them, face twisted with rage. He shouted her name with a command that felt like a chain trying to drag her back into the past. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to focus forward. The warrior whispered that she was almost safe. She clung to his voice. The ridge loomed above them. Only a few more yards? The uncle pushed ahead first, reaching the top and guiding his horse over. The scouts followed. The warrior urged their horse forward as shouts and gunshots exploded below. The settlers were dangerously close now. Too close, the final stretch of the path slanted sharply upward. The horse struggled for footing. The warrior tightened his hold, urging it on. Below, the settlers roared in anger, climbing with reckless speed. The woman felt the wind shift around her. Carrying the sound of every threat rising from below, they were almost at the ridge. Almost safe. Almost out of reach. But just as the warrior pushed the horse onto the final rise, a settler below raised his rifle with steady aim. A shot rang out. The horse stumbled. The woman screamed as the world tilted, and the ridge was still inches away. The horse lurched as the shot struck the stone near its front hoof. Dust exploded upward, blinding them for a moment, and the animal slipped, scrambling for balance on the steep edge. The woman cried out, clutching her baby as the warrior tightened his arms around both of them. His body held them steady while he shifted his weight to the opposite side, guiding the horse back onto solid ground with a calm strength that came from years of surviving the hardest parts of the old American frontier. The settlers below shouted in frustration as they saw the horse recover, their anger echoing across the rock walls. The warrior pressed forward with determination, his voice low but firm as he urged the horse toward the ridge. The final stretch felt impossible, yet the animal pushed through hooves, striking stone with new purpose. With one last surge, they crossed the ridge and into the tall pines, where the light changed from harsh moonglow to softer shadows. Behind them, the uncle and scouts formed a quick barrier, sending loose rocks down the slope to slow the settlers' climb. The settlers stumbled, cursing, unable to mount a direct chase up the narrow path. When the woman felt the ground level beneath them, her knees wobbled with relief. She held her daughter close, whispering gratitude in trembling breaths. The warrior steadied her again as he slid off the horse, then helped her down gently. His eyes scanned her face, checking if she was hurt. She told him she was fine, though her heart still pounded like thunder. He glanced down at the baby and touched the blanket lightly, making sure she was safe. The child let out a small sigh, unaware of the danger behind them. The uncle rode up beside them and nodded in approval. He said they could not stay long, but they had gained precious time. The scouts confirmed the settlers were struggling to climb the final stretch of the path, slowed by loose stone and their own anger. The uncle signaled for the group to ride deeper into the forest. The high pines offered natural cover, and the carpet of fallen needles softened their steps. The morning light slowly filtered through the branches. Washing the fear from the air little by little, they traveled until the sound of the settlers faded completely. When they finally reached a clearing with a gentle stream, the group stopped to rest. The woman sat beside the water, her baby in her arms, and washed her face. She let the cool water calm her racing pulse. The warrior stayed close, watching the forest edge for any sign of movement. His protectiveness brought her comfort in a way she had not expected. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe enough to breathe fully. The uncle joined her at the water's edge. lowering himself to sit beside her with the ease of someone who knew the land better than his own thoughts. He told her that the Apache camp was not far now. She would find shelter, food, and people who would welcome her if she wished to stay. He explained that while they valued strength and tradition, they also understood compassion. The arrival of her child would not be seen as a burden, but a blessing. She listened. Feeling hope slowly build inside her, the warrior approached and added in a quiet voice that the settlers would not pursue much farther. By now they would realize the Apache territory lay ahead. Even the settlement leader, with all his pride and anger, would not risk crossing deeper into land where he had no right. Fear would hold him back more than any rock slide or steep ridge. The woman felt a wave of ease wash over her. She knew she would never have to face that place again. They continued toward the Apache camp, and as the sun climbed higher, warm light spilled through the trees. The forest opened into a valley painted with golden grass. Smoke curled gently from fires in the distance, rising into the sky like peaceful signals. Children ran between small shelters, while women carried baskets of herbs and dried corn. Horses grazed near the stream, their tails swaying lazily. It was a quiet world, full of life and balance, so different from the tense and fearful settlement she had known. As the group entered the camp, people looked up, curious about the newcomers. The uncle spoke in their language as they approached, explaining who she was and what had happened. The elders stepped forward, their expressions calm and thoughtful. One elderly woman approached the mother first. Her eyes softened at the sight of the baby. She reached out gently, touching the child's cheek with a warm smile. She spoke words the woman did not understand, but the tone held kindness. The warrior translated softly, telling her the elder blessed the baby and welcomed her into their land. The woman felt tears prick her eyes. She whispered thanks, overwhelmed by the acceptance she had never received before. The elders discussed briefly with the uncle and warrior, and gave their approval for her to stay among them for as long as she wished. A shelter would be prepared, food given, and help offered. She felt the weight of past hardships slowly lift from her shoulders. As the day passed, the camp surrounded her with gentle curiosity. Women offered warm water and clothing for the baby. Children gathered nearby, whispering and smiling at the newborn. The warrior stayed close, helping her understand each new step. His presence felt steady, like the earth beneath her feet. She realized how much he had risked for her and her child. How many moments could have gone differently along the way? She thanked him quietly. He looked at her with calm eyes and told her he would make the same choice again. He said some people were brought into our path for a reason, and her daughter was one of those reasons. Over the next days, she learned more about the tribe's way of life. She helped gather herbs, cooked beside the women, listened to stories of ancestors and the old American land. The baby grew stronger, her small hands curling around anything she could reach. The warrior visited often, bringing fresh water, warming stones for the child, and teaching her small things about the land. Their conversations grew easier, the silence between them no longer heavy, but comfortable. One evening, as the sky turned purple with fading light, the woman and warrior stood near the stream. The baby slept peacefully against her chest. The warrior looked out across the valley and said the settlers had finally returned to their town, giving up their search. He said the danger had passed. The woman breathed out a long, relieved breath. She asked what he thought would happen now. He told her the choice was hers. She could stay with the tribe, build a new life, or choose a different path when she felt ready. She looked at him, at the calm strength in his face, and said she wanted her daughter to grow in a place where she was valued, where she would never be thrown aside. She said she wanted a life where trust mattered more than fear. The warrior nodded, his expression warm. He told her that the tribe would welcome her as one of their own, if that was the path she chose. She felt her heart settle at those words. The baby stirred softly, and the warrior leaned close to brush a finger against her tiny hand. He told her that she had already shown more strength in her short life than many grown men. The woman smiled, feeling a quiet happiness spread through her. In the weeks that followed, she built a small shelter with the help of the tribe. She learned to weave, to gather plants for medicine, to ride across the open valley without fear. The warrior remained a constant presence, someone she could rely on without question. Trust grew into something deeper, something shaped by shared hardship and new beginnings. The camp came to see her and her child as a part of its future. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs and the sky turned golden, the warrior approached her shelter. He asked if she would walk with him. She carried her daughter and followed him to the hill overlooking the valley. There, he told her that the old paths had brought them together for a reason. He said he wanted to help raise her child, protect her always, and share the life the land offered. His voice was steady, filled with sincerity. She felt her heart swell with emotion. She told him she felt the same. She had found peace here. She did not want to imagine a life apart from him. The baby shifted in her arms. The warrior placed his hand gently on the child's back. Together, they stood watching the sky fade into stars. The valley below glowed with warm firelight, the sound of laughter rising softly. The old American frontier held many hardships, but it also held unexpected hope. She realized that even after being cast out, life had led her to a place where she and her daughter could begin again. Their story became one of renewal, courage, and the strength of choosing compassion over fear. The tribe welcomed them fully, and the warrior stood beside her not out of duty, but out of genuine care. Her daughter grew in a world where she was honored, not rejected, where every step she took was surrounded by people who valued her life. The woman often looked back on the day she was cast out. What once felt like the end had become the beginning of something better. The settlement's cruelty had pushed her toward a future she never imagined. And in the heart of the wild frontier, surrounded by honest land and strong people, she found a home that felt truly hers. The warrior, the child. And the woman walked forward into a life shaped not by fear, but by hope and a sense of belonging. And in the quiet of the valley, their story settled into the land like a promise that new beginnings could rise from the hardest moments, turning sorrow into strength and abandonment into family.